What if our corporations would have structures in place where innovation could thrive, where daring and bold leaders would dare to change? What if remote work remained the new standard? How would we need to prepare the young generation that they are confident enough and creative enough to shape those spaces? What if, as we heard this morning, 3D printing would be the new standard and we would all use 3D printed goods? How would that affect our economy or make it more sustainable? What if every one of you would use that superpower on your name tag to drive change? In your family, in your organization, at school, in the society? And what if you would put joy, passion, and a little bit of yourself in every endeavor? My name is Daniela Marzavan, and I am a change darer. As such, I travel around the world, and I've seen two ways of change being driven that work quite well. One of them is to create those structures, those containers. For instance, we create more temporary structures like a 48 hours hackathon where municipal actors and data scientists create new services for citizens. We can also create more steady structures like a startup incubator or an accelerator or a spin-off. This works. It's clear. Now there's a second way how you can drive change. And I'd assume at TEDx we have a lot of people that drive transformation and change. So you would know what the second best way is to drive change. It is through empowering leaders, investing in leadership skills. And at Change Darers, we've seen it work. We have delivered many leadership trainings, capacity building trainings, where we teach those leaders to become brave, to be those superstars in their organizations that are bold enough to inspire others. And we've seen how it works to teach them things like design thinking, creativity, agile work. Lately, it was important to teach those leaders to manage remote teams throughout the pandemic, and also to teach those empathetic leadership skills, the feminine leadership, and that works. Sometimes they even need to change, to swap the tie for sneakers, and if that helps, fine enough. We have those bold leaders. But in my 10 years of working with change, I've seen the new structures and those bold leaders work very well. Nevertheless, there was every time a magic, something that I could not put in words, that really drove change, that really planted those little seeds of change and sustainability in every project. And I couldn't find the right vocabulary to explain what it is. So I went to the ivory tower of knowledge, to the academia, and did a PhD study on transformation change by design. I would not recommend you. It's a very, very, very hard way. And one day, after many years and attempts to quit, I had that eureka moment. That moment that every researcher dreams of. Finally, I had found the vocabulary, the taxonomy, the theory that helped me describe the phenomena that I had witnessed so many times. Eureka! So it turned out there are 6 other elements that are completely underrated. that we sometimes forget, that are not the structure and not that superstar leader that wears sneaker now and motivates everyone to dare to change. It turned out there are 6 more elements that we constantly forget and underrate. So I will serve you today this gift of the lens of social practice. And I'm here today to tell you some stories about this underrated lens. Hopefully, by the time we talked about them, you will feel more empowered to dare to change. Close your eyes and imagine we'd sit by the bonfire in a circle, maybe at the beach or in a lush green park. And we'd all listen to these inspiring stories. Wouldn't that be great? Well, you may open your eyes. We're at TEDx. That makes me stand on this red carpet and you sitting in rows watching me. It's fine. That's how things work at TEDx. Don't worry, I will not ask everyone to redesign the space. Nevertheless, if you would be in one of my classrooms, I would ask you to stand up and redesign the space. As a professor for creativity, design, and innovation, I found myself so many times in rooms that did not speak the language of my message. In classrooms that were completely inhibiting collaboration. So I start every classroom and every class by asking my students to stand up and redesign the room. Because space matters. If the space does not support your message, this underrated element that drives change, then you'll have to fight against it. And how can I ask my students to be creative, innovative, collaborative if they sit in a room that has a memory of humiliation, exams, bad grades? That still is the reality for many. Not all professors are that bold like you are. Having a background in building co-working spaces around the world, in Europe, in North Africa, of course I know the power of spaces. I know how in co-working spaces you have those creative juices flow around simply through the atmospheres, through the nice furniture. So space is one of those underrated elements that drive change. Actually, one of my students from a class that I called How Do You Want to Work and Live in the Future back in 2009 wrote me a letter 2020. In that class, I challenged students from Cairo to Bonn, from Belo Horizonte to Antananarivo, from Barcelona to Berlin to think how they want to live and work in the future. And do you know what they did constantly? It was one thing that kept repeating over and over again. They would redesign vans or double-decker buses to mobile offices. Does that ring a bell? It turns out what back then was a utopian exercise by an eccentric professor helped the students 2020 to become more equipped for remote work. So let us all train more how to shape spaces. I receive many messages from my students, and one of them is a letter that I brought for you today. And this letter talks about a second underrated element. I'll read it to you. I am also braver because of your kind encouragement. There is really a huge difference between my study in his home country and at this university, which lays in the choice of teaching method, either encouragement or criticism. I asked a stupid question in the last class yesterday and realized it just before I finished it. I struggled with my sense of blame for a whole day. But the good news is that I am now more courageous and tolerant about my mistakes. And it took just one day instead of several weeks or months to get over my mistake. Another underrated element is discourse. The language, the symbols that we use, the way we create the rules of engagement. If we have flat hierarchies when we talk to each other, if we encourage failure and success. So, space matters, discourse matter. Now, we talked a little bit about your superpowers. Everyone in this room, where about 200 people, has a superpower. Imagine we could wire all that knowledge, those experiences, together and tackle a wicked problem, a challenge here in your city. That is the collective intelligence, the knowledge of so many brains. Who would be better prepared to solve a problem in your city than you sitting here? Equally, as the world becomes more complex and challenging, to say the least, I witness a global network of makers, hackers, and innovators that try to challenge the way we distribute knowledge. It's called the Global Innovation Gathering, and 170 brains wire their collective knowledge, open up the code, the design, the way they do things to each other. 2 weeks ago, we had our 10 years meeting at the Makerspace during a huge conference. And I remember how, during that time, a dam in the Ukraine was bombed. Maybe you recall it. Immediately, our chats started to work. And people were exchanging ways to filter and purify water. It was clear that the people from the network that come from South Sudan, from Iraq, from Syria, would have those solutions ready to share. Imagine the collective knowledge that we have, the collective intelligence, if we would just share that knowledge on a regular basis. So knowledge matters. And it mattered throughout the pandemic. I vividly remember how one of our members, Salim Mahmoud from Mosul Makerspace, told me a story about how he produced 3D printed spare parts for medical devices for his hospitals, for the hospitals in his city. Because if you remember, there was a huge supply chain problem. So it turns out all the makerspaces around this network have used the same knowledge. That 3D printed spare part for medical devices is also an underrated element that drives change. That little thing tells a story about how it's been produced and challenges the industrial way of producing objects. Distributed manufacturing and open knowledge are things that also can drive change. So knowledge matters and things matter. Don't underestimate them when you start a change project. There are two missing, and these two are very dear to my heart. So, I was born in Romania, in a country of crisis, in a country in transition. And I remember how my grandmother would stand up at 4 a.m. to go queue for a liter of milk without knowing that 5 hours later, when she would reach the front, she would really receive what she was waiting for. I remember my mother standing in lines for days to get a visa for us to travel abroad, what today is so easy, without knowing if you would get what you're waiting for at the end of that line. That kind of knowledge is what I call embodied knowledge. My body has a memory of handling uncertainty. Whenever crisis and uncertainty happen, my body says, you have it. Calm down. It's just uncertainty. So nurturing and honoring the body as the place where resilience and change can happen, where the body as the place that has a memory equally as the space, is also a very underrated element of change. And now comes my secret one. It's called Meraki. Meraki in Greek means to put joy, passion, and a bit of yourself in whatever you do. And it was with Meraki that my grandmother would queue there without knowing if she would get that milk. And it is with Meraki that I design big corporate innovation programs for companies. And it is with Meraki that we deliver training programs for leaders. And it was with Meraki that I risk my job over and over again by changing those classrooms and provoking everyone to teach differently. And I hope you understand what is your Meraki. The body, your embodied knowledge from your experience, as well as your mind, your mindset, your routine way of doing things, of thinking, of feeling. Here you go. You're good to go. With these 8 elements, you're good to drive change. This lens through which you can look when you want to analyze if change in your organization works, with this lens through which you can look if you want to plan or maybe you want to analyze as a researcher change, you are good to go. So make sure you have all these ingredients the moment you want to start your next change adventure. Make sure you have all the people in place that you need, and then you're good to go. And one more thing, make sure your Meraki shines through this lens all the way through the process. Have fun changing.